My name is Alexis Carter, and this is the part of my story that no one in my family ever knew. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Washington, D.C., in a white brick house with a red door that creaks when you open it. From the outside, it looks ordinary, just another house on a street where people mow their lawns on Saturdays and put up flags on holidays. But inside those walls is where I built my secret, a life so far removed from what my family imagined for me that they would never have believed it. The heart of that secret sat on a small wooden desk by the front window, my old laptop. It wasn't much to look at. Its silver case was scratched, the keys were smudged, and the screen sometimes flickered when I moved it. But to me, it was alive, humming with a quiet energy that pulled me in. I spent long nights bent over it, the glow of the screen reflecting in the window, my fingers moving faster than my thoughts. That laptop was where my empire began. I didn't start out with any plan to build something vast, let alone worth billions. At first, it was just me writing code because I loved it. I found peace in solving problems that other people couldn't even see. When most of my friends were out at bars or scrolling their phones, I was teaching myself how to build safer systems for businesses and people who had no idea how vulnerable they were. The work started small. A bakery in New York had its payment system compromised, and through an online forum, the owner reached out in desperation. I patched their system, secured their files, and asked for nothing more than a simple payment of a few $100s. The owner wired me $500 in US dollars, grateful as if I had saved her entire world. That moment showed me something important. What I knew had value. Real value.
Soon more people found me.
A small hospital in Chicago had its patient records locked by ransomware. Their IT team was helpless. I worked with them for a week, often through the night, rewriting their protection protocols line by line. When the hospital board insisted on paying me, I asked for $45,000. They paid without blinking, and for the first time, I felt the weight of real money transferring because of my skills. I paid my bills, updated my equipment, and realized this could be much bigger than side work. Not long after, a city official in Denver reached out. Their servers were failing, and whole sections of city services were at risk. I signed a quiet contract, tucked it under the name of a holding company I had created, and worked until the systems ran smoothly again. The city wired $275,000 to me. I remember looking at the bank balance on my screen, my heart pounding, realizing that my hobby was turning into something formidable. But I didn't brag. I didn't even tell my family. To them, I was just Alexis, the daughter who never seemed to fit the mold, the sister who always had her nose buried in her laptop, the one who couldn't do anything else. They saw me tapping keys for hours, drinking coffee from the same chipped mug, and thought I was wasting my life. Sometimes I overheard their whispers. My mother would sigh and say I should get a real job. My father joked that I'd end up fixing printers at an office supply store. My brother laughed when I said no, thank you, to his idea of joining his sales firm. My sister rolled her eyes when I missed a family dinner because I was deep in a project. I let them believe what they wanted. My silence wasn't weakness, it was protection. I knew they wouldn't understand, and I didn't owe them proof before I was ready. Instead, I put my energy into the empire I was quietly building. I set up layered trusts and companies hidden behind other companies. It was not to deceive anyone, but to protect the work from curious eyes. I learned how to structure contracts, how to move funds across entities, and how to let the money grow quietly without my name on flashy headlines. Every time I closed a deal, I smiled to myself, because the less my family knew, the safer my world remained. One of my biggest breaks came from London. A financial firm reached out with a desperate plea. Their systems were at risk, and they needed someone discreet. I worked with them for 6 weeks, often balancing time zones between DC and Europe. They paid me £10 million for the contract, money that landed in one of my holding accounts like a thunderclap. I never even told my family I had traveled there once to finalize the system. I simply said I was busy with work. The money began to pile up faster than I ever expected. At first it trickled, then it flowed, then it roared. I saw contracts worth millions, wires that added zero after zero to my accounts. I knew the number was growing, but I didn't let it consume me. Instead, I kept my same routines: my white house, my chipped mug, my creaky door. I bought nothing extravagant. My neighbors probably thought I lived an average life, and that was exactly how I wanted it. What mattered was that inside that house, behind the red door, I was no longer just Alexis, the overlooked daughter. I was the architect of something far bigger. My code was running through systems across America, protecting hospitals, banks, city governments, and private businesses. My work became the quiet backbone of operations that thousands of people relied on every day, though none of them knew my name. I sometimes wondered if my family would ever notice. Could they see the faint changes? The way I no longer worry about rent, or how I replace my old car with something a little newer. They never asked. They were too sure of the story they had already written about me, that I was a woman wasting her life on a laptop, and so I let them hold on to that picture. Because one day I knew the truth would come out. And when it did, it would not just surprise them, it would shatter everything they thought they knew about me. For now, though, I lived quietly with my secret. My house knew the truth. The walls of my little office heard the clacking of keys, the late-night laughter when a solution worked, the quiet sighs when I faced yet another challenge. My laptop knew the truth. Its worn keys carried the fingerprints of a billion-dollar empire being built one contract at a time, and deep down, I knew the truth most of all. I was becoming someone no one in my family could even imagine. It was a quiet spring evening when I first crossed paths with the man who would later become President of the United States. I was working late, as usual, with my laptop humming on the desk and the faint sound of rain against the window. My inbox chimed. At the time, I received countless requests from strangers, some genuine, many scams, but this one caught my attention. The sender was a young congressman named Jonathan Hale. His campaign website had been breached. Hackers had plastered offensive messages across the homepage, and donations were being rerouted. His team was in chaos. He needed help. I hesitated for only a moment. Politics had never been my world, but broken systems were. I leaned forward, rolled my shoulders, and began typing. Within an hour, I had traced the exploit, patched the hole, restored the donation system, and rebuilt his firewall so tight that even the original attackers would struggle to understand what had stopped them. When Jonathan asked what he owed me, I surprised him by saying, "Nothing. Because I can." That was the first time I heard his quiet laugh, the laugh that would one day echo through the halls of the White House. From then on, Jonathan stayed in touch. He didn't ask me for favors, but he asked me questions. He wanted to know how I thought, how I solved problems, how I stayed calm under pressure. We built a friendship over late-night calls, me in my little house in Washington, D.C., and him traveling the country, trying to prove himself to voters. Sometimes he would ask me about technology, other times about discipline, and occasionally about doubt. He once said, "Alexis, you don't realize it, but the way you live, quiet, focused, steady, is the way a leader should be." I brushed off his words then, but I carried them with me. While he chased votes, I built my empire. My work had grown beyond small contracts, and I began to dream of creating something larger, something that could serve not just one hospital or one bank, but thousands at once. That dream became Havengate, a cloud platform that allowed companies to lock down their systems with the click of a button. It was simple, fast, and powerful. The first version was crude, coded in long nights fueled by caffeine and determination, but it worked. I launched Havengate quietly, without any grand announcements. I priced it to be accessible, $49 a month for a tiny team, for $1,900 for a large company. At first, I thought only startups or small businesses would use it. To my surprise, a mid-sized bank in Boston signed a contract for $2 million, impressed by how quickly they could secure their entire infrastructure. That deal was the first sign that Havengate was not just a product, but a revolution. Word spread. A chain of clinics in Texas contacted me next, desperate after repeated attacks on their patient systems. I flew out to Austin for the first time, keeping my name quiet, blending in as just another consultant. I left with a signed 5-year contract worth $8,500,000. I returned to my white brick house with a red door, sat at my desk, and stared at the numbers on my screen. The money felt unreal, yet it was very real. Then came San Francisco. A private group with global ties reached out, offering payment in pounds through their US branch. I agreed, not for the money alone, but because I wanted to see if Havengate could stand up to the most aggressive environments in the tech world. They wired £10 million without hesitation. 6 months later, they doubled their investment. By then, Havengate was no longer a secret experiment. It was a juggernaut. As demand grew, I realized I couldn't do it all alone. I began to hire carefully, choosing people not only for their skills but for their integrity. Maya Brooks was the first, a brilliant systems engineer from Boston who loved solving puzzles as much as I did. Then came Elena Rossi, an Italian-American security analyst who had a knack for seeing loopholes others missed. Ben Foster, a quiet but steady coder from Oregon, joined next. Finally, James Reed, a bold strategist with sharp instincts, completed the team. Together, we formed a core that would carry Havengate forward. We opened a modest office near Union Market in D.C., a place where the scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee drifted through the streets. Later, we expanded to a larger office in Austin, where the energy of the city seemed to match our own. But I always returned to my small house with the red door, where the heart of the empire still lived. Venture capital firms began to circle. They called, emailed, and sent invitations to dinners at fancy restaurants. They dangled promises of rapid growth, larger teams, and international reach. But I said no every time. I liked owning what I built. I liked that Havengate belonged to me and to the people I trusted. I didn't need anyone else's validation. One crisp autumn morning, I sat in my office, papers scattered across the desk, when my accountant, Oliver King, arrived. Oliver was a calm man, the kind of person who never seemed surprised by anything. He wore the same gray suits, spoke in measured tones, and always carried a leather notebook. That morning, though, there was something different in his voice. "Alexis," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Do you know where you stand right now?" I shook my head. Numbers were always flowing, contracts, renewals, expansions, but I hadn't stopped to measure. "Your valuation," he said slowly, "has passed $50 billion. He spoke the zeros one at a time, like stepping stones across a wide river. 500000000. The sound of it filled the room like a church bell. I leaned back in my chair, stunned but also oddly calm. $50 billion. The number itself seemed absurd, almost detached from reality, but the proof was there on paper in accounts across banks, in contracts inked and sealed. I wasn't just successful, I was extraordinary. And yet, sitting there in my small house with a red door, it felt as if nothing had changed. My neighbors still waved to me in the mornings. I still bought my coffee from the corner shop. My family still believed I was wasting my life behind a laptop. I closed my laptop, stood, and walked through the creaky hallway of my house. My fingers brushed against the cool brass of the red door handle. I thought about telling my family, about watching their expressions shift from disbelief to awe. But something inside me held back. The time wasn't right. Instead, I smiled to myself. Let them think what they wanted. Let them whisper their doubts. The truth would come, and when it did, it would arrive like a storm. For now, I carried the secret of $50 billion quietly, the way I carried everything. And in the background, Jonathan Hale kept rising, step by step, from congressman to senator, from senator to something even greater. I had no idea then how our paths would cross again, or how the friendship we built would one day change everything at a family gathering I could never forget. Cleveland, Ohio, has always been the backdrop of my childhood. My parents' house sits on a wide street with neatly trimmed lawns and neighbors who gossip from porches. It's bigger than my house in Washington, D.C., louder too. The walls carry the echoes of every family gathering, birthdays, holidays, graduations, arguments, and reconciliations. That house was the stage where my parents played the role of proud hosts, even when pride in me was never part of their script. It was in that house, on a brisk autumn afternoon, that my family decided to host a gathering for extended relatives and friends. The smell of roast chicken and lemon polish filled the living room, a combination that somehow managed to feel both homey and suffocating. People chatted loudly in corners, balancing paper plates of food and red cups of punch. I stood near the window, cup in hand, keeping to myself as usual. My mother, Linda, floated around like the queen of the evening, wearing her best pearls. My father, Robert, stuck close to her, making small talk and laughing too loudly at jokes. My brother, Mark, relished the attention as he retold stories about his career in sales, each one slightly more exaggerated than the last. My sister, Emily, stayed quiet, though she still carried the same subtle disapproval in her gaze whenever it fell on me. At one point, when the conversation shifted toward careers and successes, my mother gestured toward me with a dismissive wave of her hand. "This stupid woman," she said, chuckling to the guests, "is always glued to her laptop and can't do anything else." My father nodded along, and Mark added his laughter to the chorus. Emily didn't laugh, but she didn't defend me either. She just looked away. I sipped my punch in silence, my face calm, though a storm churned in my chest. Over the years, I had learned the art of silence. It was my shield and my sword. Words, I realized, were often wasted on people who had already decided not to hear them. Then, without warning, the air in the room shifted. The front door opened, and a gust of cool air swept inside. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. What happened next unfolded with the kind of surreal clarity that etches itself into memory forever. First came the men in dark suits, Secret Service. Their presence alone silenced the room. And then he walked through the doorway. President Jonathan Hale. The same man I once helped fix a broken campaign site. The same man who had called me during late nights to ask questions about leadership. The same man who had risen, step by step, until he carried the weight of the entire nation on his shoulders. He was not there as a politician giving a speech or shaking hands. He was there as a friend. In his hand, he carried a small bouquet of white lilies and a gold envelope. His expression was warm, his smile genuine. "Alexis," he said, his voice steady and familiar. "Congratulations on reaching $50 billion. He said it as simply as if he were telling the time, without fanfare or exaggeration. Then he added, "Your platform keeps our hospitals safe, our power stations calm, and our small towns open for business. I came to say, thank you." The room froze. My mother's hand, mid-gesture, dropped to her side. My father's mouth fell open, and he forgot how to close it. Mark blinked rapidly, his confidence draining like water from a cracked glass. Emily whispered my name under her breath, as though it had suddenly transformed into a word she had never spoken before. Jonathan turned his gaze to my parents. "Your daughter helped my team long before I took this office," he said. His voice carried the authority of the presidency, but also the intimacy of friendship. She never asked for credit. She never asked for a cent from me. She just did the work, and she did it better than anyone. With deliberate care, he handed me the gold envelope. Inside was a single sheet of White House stationery. In his handwriting were 6 simple words, "For work that keeps America safe." Alongside the note was a small, gleaming lapel pin, etched with a presidential seal. The weight of that envelope in my hand was heavier than the billions in my bank account. It was acknowledgement, not just of my work, but of my worth. And it came from the highest office in the land. The silence in the room was thick until my parents broke it, stumbling over themselves in a rush of words. "We didn't know. We're so proud of you. Of course, we always believed in you." The phrases tumbled out, desperate to cover years of dismissal with a thin layer of apology. My father's voice cracked, my mother's face flushed, and even Mark tried to mask a shock with forced laughter. But I heard the truth beneath their words. I heard the years of doubt, the years of mockery, the years when their support was absent. Their sudden pride felt less like love and more like a scramble to claim a share of a spotlight they had once told me I would never stand in. I stood there quietly, bouquet in one hand, envelope in the other, my face calm. Inside me, though, something shifted. For the first time in my life, I no longer needed their approval. I no longer longed for their acknowledgement. I had outgrown it. Jonathan glanced at me, his eyes steady, as if to remind me that the world outside those walls already knew who I was. I didn't need to prove it to anyone in that room. The gathering continued, but it wasn't the same. Conversations turned into whispers, glances darted in my direction, and every gesture from my family felt forced, strained, and hollow. I remained near the window, my place of choice, but this time I wasn't standing in the shadows. The President of the United States had walked into my parents' house to honor me, and nothing could erase that image from the minds of those who witnessed it. As the evening wore on, I realized the truth of the moment. This was the turning point. My family's perception of me had cracked open, revealing a gap so wide that no apology could bridge it. They might have been shocked, they might have felt shame, but for me, it was liberation. The house that once echoed with their laughter at my expense now echoed with silence, awe, and disbelief. And for the first time, I saw clearly what I needed to do next. I set my cup down carefully on the table, the paper bending slightly under the weight of the liquid left inside. My mother's eyes were wide, my father's face pale, and my brother's jaw still hung slack. Emily looked at me with something between awe and regret. The air was thick with the words they had just spoken, stupid woman, and the truth President Hale had revealed. For years, I had carried their dismissal like an invisible chain, but at that moment, I felt lighter than I had ever felt before. I told you I was working, I said, my voice calm, steady, and free of anger. You chose not to believe me. That is not my burden to carry. They tried to speak over each other, stumbling through apologies. My mother's voice cracked, saying she hadn't meant it, that she was only joking. My father insisted that deep down, he had always been proud. Mark, still dazed, muttered something about not realizing what I had been doing all these years. Emily finally whispered, "I'm sorry, Alexis." Their words floated in the air like feathers, soft but weightless, too late to settle anywhere meaningful. In that moment, memories rushed through me. The long nights in my white brick house with the red door, the chipped mug of coffee that never seemed to empty, the quiet hum of my old laptop. I thought of the first $49 subscription plan I sold, the first $1 million wire that had startled me awake, and the carefully signed trust papers that had hidden my empire in plain sight. Each memory stood taller than their apologies. President Hale stepped closer and gently offered me his arm. His presence filled the room with dignity, and his words cut through the noise of my family's remorse. "Alexis," he said softly, "come take a ride. I'd like to show you something at the White House." I looked at him, then back at my family. Their faces were desperate now, reaching for me as though their hands could pull back the years of disbelief. "I'm going now," I said simply. My tone carried no malice, only clarity. "I wish you well." They pleaded with me to stay, but I didn't. I had given them years of silence while I built something extraordinary, and in return, they had given me doubt. That debt was not mine to repay. I walked with Jonathan out of the living room, past the shocked guests who parted like water around a boat. I passed the polished furniture, the photographs on the walls, the lemon-scented shine of surfaces my mother had scrubbed for the gathering. Finally, I stepped through the door that had once kept me in my place, and this time, I did not look back. Outside, the cool evening air wrapped around me like a new skin. The motorcade waited at the curb, black cars gleaming under the street lamps. Secret Service agents moved with quiet precision, opening a door for us. I slid inside, and Jonathan followed. The leather seats smelled faintly of cedar, the hum of the engine a low promise of motion. As the car pulled away, I watched the house through the window. It shrank quickly, the red door turning into a small blur, the lights glowing like distant stars until the whole building became just another shape in the neighborhood I had once called home. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel triumphant. I felt clear. Clarity is a strange gift. It strips away both the weight of longing and the sting of resentment. Back in Washington, I returned to my own house, the white brick with the red door that had sheltered me all these years. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the comfort of familiarity, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint smell of coffee grounds left in the kitchen. I sat at my desk, my faithful laptop waiting like an old friend. I opened it and typed a short message to my team. We did this. Now let's do more. Then I opened my accounts, staring at the endless rows of numbers that no longer startled me. $50 billion. It was more than wealth. It was power, responsibility, and opportunity. I thought of the people who could be lifted by it, people who reminded me of myself. Girls coding at kitchen tables, women balancing bills while chasing dreams, schools in need of better computers, libraries begging for funding. I made my first move. I transferred $150 million into a foundation I had quietly drafted. Money for schools in Detroit and New Orleans, for public libraries in small towns across the Midwest, for scholarships for women in technology. I named it Haven Foundation, in honor of Havengate, the platform that had made it possible. Dollars turned into futures, and the weight of that decision filled me with more pride than any contract I had ever signed. Despite the magnitude of what I had accomplished, I kept my life simple. I didn't buy a mansion or a private jet. I didn't cover myself in jewels or drive flashy cars. I still took my evening walks through the quiet streets of DC, nodding to neighbors who waved, none of them knowing the empire I carried on my shoulders. Sometimes I thought about Europe, about the clients in London who had paid me in pounds, and the brief trips I had taken to finalize deals. But my heart remained here, in America. It was in the hum of my laptop, in the red door of my house, in the people who would one day benefit from the work I had done. People often ask what changed after that day in Cleveland when the president walked into my parents' house and shattered the illusions they had built around me. My answer is simple. Nothing inside me changed. I was always this woman. The builder, the dreamer, the protector. The rest of the world simply caught up. As for my family, I left them behind forever. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. You cannot carry the storm with you once you've driven out of it. You move on, calm and steady, certain of the road ahead. They had made their choice when they dismissed me, and I had made mine when I chose to walk away. That night, as I closed my laptop and looked around my small but powerful home, I realized something profound. Freedom doesn't come from money, though money helps. Freedom comes from clarity, knowing who you are, what you've built, and what you will no longer accept. And I, Alexis Carter, was free.